taking the shot because it wasn't authentic. I could tell by the way they were acting, by the way they posed when I lifted up the camera, and it was this is a sad photo to me. She's got a sad expression on her face,
Yeah.
but there's an extra layer of meaning there, and whenever I talk to people about this picture, I tell them that story.
And then we have some architecture. The angle makes it, you know, seem very powerful, which it is, a very powerful building that you're in. How did you decide to make the HDR work in this way?
Well, in this church, we were not allowed to take photos in this room. Those are often the best photos.
Yeah.
I looked up, and I was leaning over a chain, and I looked up and I saw this magnificent ceiling. And not only is there all that detail and color, but the sunlight was streaming through these windows at the top of the dome, and it had to be photographed. And HDR enabled me to capture the light coming through and capture all the detail in the decorations around the walls at the same time.
And churches are very dark too, so this helped you bring out all the detail that was there.
Yeah, and it was definitely a tripod shot as well.
Yeah, and you can't see that kind of detail with your human eye. And in the next image here, is that sunset or sunrise?
That was just before sunset. The sun was actually still quite high in the sky, but it's a bit deceptive because it's a wide-angle lens, and a wide-angle lens is going to shrink things down and, you know, distort some dimensions. But it was again, the clouds really set the mood and give this picture a double meaning. I like the subject matter of this shot because there's a whole spiritual element to it.
Yeah, there seems to be a few photos here with that element. You have the treasury at night with these candles. Did you find this way, or did you set this up?
This was actually set up by some of the locals who ran a nighttime tour of the area. Technically, it was difficult because I had to use my wide-angle lens at its widest setting. It's actually quite large, and it may not look like it in the photo, but you're looking almost down to almost straight up on the side of this cliff. And again, this is another example of how HDR really made the shot. You have the candles on the bottom, which are obviously very bright, and you have the stars in the sky. And in a traditional photograph, it's impossible to capture the detail. But when you're there, that's what you see with your eyes. So again, this is, I think, one of the virtues of HDR photography.
And in this next image, the cross is glowing. I'm assuming that's from a light down at the bottom. But you really brought it out here, and it seems to be like there's fog, or maybe it's the clouds.
There was a bit of fog, a bit of haze in the air. Again, this is another example of HDR really bringing out the color of light. You know, when you're there, the lights are very bright, and the church behind it is very dark. But in this case, you're able to balance everything out and pull the true color of things out, and it really gave it this golden glow that appealed to me.
Now, do you have to do a lot of work in Photoshop, or?
In Photoshop, I don't do a whole lot of work. I use some applications outside of Photoshop to do my HDR processing. I use Photoshop for some of the minor adjustments like sharpening the image or reducing noise, but I try to avoid manipulating the image too much. I do my basic HDR processing, and then I just try to let it live like that.
Yeah. And in this next image here, a daytime shot, the overgrowth. Were you on the ground for this, or what angle were you at?
This is actually a tricky place to photograph. There's a lot of natural beauty, you know, with the trees growing out of the ruins, but the sun was shining through the trees at different angles, and I actually made our guide take me back there the next morning because the sun wasn't right when we were there the first time. The angle was looking almost straight up. That tree that's growing out of the roof there is going almost straight up. So sometimes as a photographer, you have to get dirty and lay down on the ground and do what you got to do to get the shot.
And when you find yourself in situations like this, do you end up taking the image from a lot of different angles to find one that works, or do you just kind of walk around and settle in a place?
I try to give myself a little bit of variety, but when you're there on location, you definitely know when you've got the shot.
Mm-hmm.
You experiment a little bit, and you take a few different angles, but when you've got the right one, you know it at the time.
And this next image, sunrise, you're working with the reflections again, and the sky and the water. How long did it take you to find this place here?
Well, finding it was easy. I was taken there. This one is really a matter of being there at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
This was sunrise, and sunrise and sunset happen so quickly that every 30 seconds you're getting a new photo. And the colors are changing so dramatically, and this was the one that I thought turned out best. It takes a bit of patience to wait for things to look just right.
Yeah, it's framed very nicely. It's symmetrical. It's nice.
Okay.
And then we have very different place to shift to here, the Atlantic City Boardwalk. But this image is very vibrant, although it seems like it's a very gloomy day.
It was a gloomy day. It was very cold, actually, but it's such an iconic scene in America that I wanted to capture it. Again, it's a wide-angle shot, and it's right up the middle of the boardwalk. There aren't really any interesting angles. This is pretty much right down the pipe, and sometimes that kind of symmetry can be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's just a photographic decision that you have to make.
And then you have the Grand Prismatic Spring. A lot of different colors, very rich in color here. Did you have to tweak it much with your HDR, or is that pretty much what it looked like?
Well, when I do my processing, I try to replicate the way it looked. Sometimes when you do your processing, you take some creative liberties and push things a little bit. But in this case, if anything, I had to tone it down a bit. The colors there were fantastic, and not only that, but the steam coming off of it was changing every second, every time the wind blew across the surface of the water. So I had to wait for the steam to take on a good-looking shape before I could take the picture.
And then shifting into your next image is very dark. You've titled it Death Train. It looks different than any other train I've seen. Why did you choose to make this black and white?
Well, this was shot at a concentration camp, so it's obviously very somber subject matter. I think in a lot of ways black and white shows respect for its subject matter. I remember when Schindler's List came out, there was a lot of talk about why Spielberg decided to make that movie black and white, and I kind of get it, and I kind of agree that he did the right thing there. The thing about black and white also is that typically you want your subject matter to be simple. You want the shapes and the forms to speak to you. And in this case, it's really just the train and the tracks and then the clouds as a backdrop. And in the distance on the right, you can see the gatehouse, which was the entrance to the camp.
And in your next shot, along with trains, you have train through Polish countryside. Very bright now in color. Were you just taking the train through, or how did you come about this?
Yeah, pretty much just sitting on a train going from Krakow to Vienna, I believe. And the sun was just coming up. I had slept on the train overnight, and we were waking up, and the sun was had that soft glow, that soft morning glow. And it worked out. The electrical poles were zooming by, the trees were zooming by, so I took a few shots, but this was the one that had, I think, the right balance.
And so how did you frame that? You must have been a very fast shutter speed.
Yes, it was a fast shutter speed, and I was also precariously leaning out the train window, but all good photographers take risks.
That's true. So the next photo we're going to look at is the railway station. It looks like you're low to ground in this image. Was it taken with a wide angle?
Yes, it was. For that one, I got way down. I knew that the awning over the station would really flare out with the wide-angle lens, and it was a pretty dramatic sky, so it really worked.
And it looks like you have minimal HDR in this photo, where in some of the other ones it looks like it was used a little bit more. How did you edit this photo?
Well, most of the photos that we've seen do have some degree of HDR processing, some more than others. My goal is to always go for realism, maybe push it just a little bit. A lot of people go overboard with the HDR, but I try to keep things. I try to recreate the scenes that I remember in my head.
And then we have your last image here, rainbow. A rainbow is very hard to photograph. But you did a great job here making sure everything came out. Is that due in part to the HDR?
That's part of it, but in this particular case, that rainbow is permanently there. There's a spray from the waterfall, and as long as the sun is shining, there will be a rainbow somewhere. You just need to find the right angle. So I just walked around and found my spot, and I wanted to make sure the rainbow was coming out of the middle of the waterfall, and it just worked out.
A lot of your work is landscape. Do you enjoy photographing people?
I do enjoy photographing people, but I think it's becoming more and more difficult to do that. In this day and age, people have cell phones, webcams, Facebook, and they become very media savvy. And they're very conscious of their own image. And when you point a big camera at somebody, you're going to get some sort of reaction, and that reaction is never natural. So typically when somebody sees a camera, they're going to perform for you somehow, or they're going to get very shy and back off, and you're not going to get a candid shot of somebody. So I don't like taking shots that are too posed. I like taking those natural shots, and because it's harder and harder to do, it's easier to take a picture of a tree or a mountain that doesn't shy away. That's what I tend to do more of.
And why do you think that travel and photography go so well together?
Well, travel and photography are both about exploration and discovery. And it's just natural for those two things to happen at the same time. In fact, at this point, it's impossible for me to travel without taking pictures, and it's difficult for me to take pictures without traveling. It feels like both have to happen at the same time.
Yeah. And how do you feel your work is distinctive? What makes your work so distinctive?
Well, I spend a lot of time choosing my subjects and composing my shots and then processing them so that everything's balanced. I like to capture a balanced image that just feels right and is comfortable to look at. And I also like taking pictures that have a story to tell. Sometimes you can tell the story with just the image. I think photography purists would say that photographs are supposed to tell a story. But I like backing them up with my own story. I feel like if you have some background about what's being shot or about what my personal experience was getting that shot, I think it really adds another dimension to it. I keep a travel blog whenever I go traveling so that I can supplement my pictures with a story, with something personal. And I think when you put that all together, it really gives you a complete picture of what I experienced.
For more information about Jeff Nyveen's photographs, please contact him using the information on your screen. Your images really demonstrate how much you get from traveling. Thank you so much for coming here today to show them.
Thank you very much.
Join us next time, Behind the Lens.